Okay, everybody, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome to the first meeting of the 2022 SPIL Transportation group meetings. Today, we actually have two special guests. I'm first going to introduce Luann Kibbe. She's been an IL advocate for many years and currently serves as Nichols Vice President. She's the board chair for the Kansas Disability Caucus, and she works as the systems advocacy manager for the SPIL Resource Center. She's going to help us introduce our key speaker today, Mr. Kelly Buckland. So Luann, if you want to go ahead and take it away from us.
All righty, thanks, Christina. So some of you've probably heard Kelly speak at the caucus years ago, possibly some of those that have been around a while. So Kelly has been involved in disability advocacy since 1979. He spent 20 years in Boise, Idaho, as the executive director of the Boise Center, which is also called LINC, Laura, but their LINC stands for Living Independence Network Corporation. And also he was the executive director of the Idaho Silk. There's a long history. Kelly's done a whole lot in his career, especially through IL. He's testified in Congress numerous times. He was on the Nickel board from 1998 to 2009. He went on the board a year before me. And then he became the Nickel ED executive director in 2009 and just retired from that position last year, which I thought he was going to retire and chill out and enjoy his one of his hobbies with his cars, which he still is enjoying. But much to my surprise, he was appointed by President Biden to the position of the Disability Advisor for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy at the United States Department of Transportation. And Kelly has been my friend for very many years, and proud to call him a friend. And he actually stopped through here a couple of weeks ago, something like that, over the holidays on his way to Idaho. And my husband gave him a ride on our wheelchair accessible sidecar. It was a little brisk, so it was a short ride, but he got a ride anyway, so he can say that. So I don't know, Christina, how if you want to have the others introduce themselves so he has an idea of where they're from or what your plan is.
Well, we can do that. If we want to start with Laura, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Laura Denny. I work out of Hays, Kansas for LINC, which is Living Independently in Northwest Kansas.
And next we have Adam.
Good morning. My name is Adam Burnett. I'm with the Resource Center for Independent Living, and I'm here in Osage City.
Okay, and let's see, H. Anderson.
I'm Harley Anderson. I'm with the Independent Living Resource Center, and I'm sitting in for Craig Perbeck today.
And then Mignon, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Mignon Lucky, and I'm with Prairie Independent Living Resource Center in Dodge City.
Okay, Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Warren. I'm the mobility manager for the South Central portion of Kansas, hosted out of Wichita.
Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica Christie, the Assistant Director of Three Rivers Independent Living Center in Wamego, Kansas.
Lenisi. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I'm Lenise. I'm the transportation coordinator or manager at Independence Incorporated in Lawrence, Kansas.
Okay. And then the last one I'm seeing is it's just a phone number. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce.
You might let them know that the number ends in 6580, so they know it's.
Let's say, looks like you're still muted. Let's say if you can't unmute or there, you have a way to type in the chat to let us know who you are, it'd be appreciated. Okay. Well, while we're waiting to find out who's at 6580, Kelly, if you want to go ahead and take it away. Luann did a great job of introducing you to us. But if you wanted to, talk to us about experiences you've had, especially regards to transportation through all your years of IL service and kind of what you're working on now, we would love to hear from you.
Well, thanks. And Luann, thanks for the great introduction. Luann is a very dear friend of mine. We've worked together for a really long time and got a lot of things done. As she mentioned, I drove through Kansas a couple of weeks ago on my way to Idaho, stopped in and saw Luann, and then on my way back home right now. So I'm actually in Jackson, Tennessee. Day before yesterday, I was in Dodge City. I couldn't get that close to Dodge City and not go. I watch Gunsmoke all the time, so I had to go to see Dodge City. So I got to meet Matt Dillon there and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what my plans are now that I'm at the Department of Transportation. But first, for those of you who do not know me, I ran a Center for Independent Living in Boise, Idaho for 6 years. Then I ran the State Independent Living Council in Idaho for about 15 years. And then I went to work for the National Council on Independent Living, or NICL, and put in 12 years there as the director. And then prior to being the director of NICL, I was president for 4 years, and then I was vice president for 4 years before that. So I was vice president when Mike Oxford was president, and I was president when, I think you were vice president when I was president. Were you, Luann?
Yes.
And then Luann was president while I was director. So yeah. We really have worked together a lot. And I do have a lot of experience with independent living. So, and putting together state plans for independent living. Did plenty of those while I was at the state of Idaho's State Independent Living Council. So, so this whole experience that I've had in the last couple of weeks, this driving experience, has really come about because of the lack of transportation for people with disabilities. So I had to drive like 5,000 miles to get to Idaho and then back home because air travel for people with disabilities just simply isn't safe. I mean, it's not a safe experience. We've seen people die. In fact, we had a recent death of a woman who was flying, and they caused her decubitus to get reopened up and infected, and she passed away from it. So, and she's not the first, and she's not going to be the last unless we do something about this. But I went to book tickets, and the other part of this is the only place that was even available, because I was going back to Idaho for a funeral. So you don't get a lot of notice on that. So the only place I could get a ticket is in a middle seat. And of course, there's no mandatory vaccination requirements for people on airplanes. So I could have been sitting in the middle seat between two unvaccinated people carrying COVID, as far as I know. So, because there's no testing in the United States either, unless you travel abroad, you don't have to test. So I could be sitting next to two people So that's one safety risk. The other safety risk is just simply when they put you in and out of the aisle chair. So I just really couldn't see that flying back to Idaho was a safe experience. So we ended up driving. The other reason, you know, I thought about rail, but trains don't go to Idaho. So buses don't go there either. So it's like, sure, there's some experiences in Kansas the same way, but you just you cannot get from DC to Idaho or lack of transportation. I mean, essentially, if you don't drive, you don't go there. So
he had to drive his Hellcat.
Yeah, well, now that's the good part of it. I did get to drive my Hellcat across the country and back. So I've been enjoying that part. But so this all sort of leads into what are my priorities at the Department of Transportation. So I've been outlining a disability policy portfolio for DOT and have been vetting that internally, and I'm still in the process. So what I'm going to give you today is more like a high level discussion about what I think the things are that we're going to pick at DOT as the disability policy portfolio there. So I usually give some demographics around disability, but I'm not going to do that because I know you guys already know all the demographics. So, but I am going to mention that, and you should think about this when you're developing your state plan, there's a ton of transportation money out there. I mean, a ton of it. So think about that. There's already CARES Act money out there and it's probably available. So you might want to look at what kinds of funds would be available in Kansas under the CARES Act. Then there's the regular programs you're all familiar with that go on each and every year. But the new bipartisan infrastructure bill law, I guess what they call it. So it's a bill, right? BIL. That's what they're calling it, is the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it spells bill. So you just call it bill. Anyway, that's there's a ton of money in the bill. And that's going to be released soon. There's quite a bit of it's going to be released soon. So there's a lot of money you should be thinking about when you're developing your state plan. The Department of Transportation has never had this much money in its entire history. So this is like precedent setting kinds of levels of funding. They're going to be installing like, I can't remember, like 500,000, I think, fueling stations, like electronic fueling stations, or electric fueling stations. Most of them, or a lot of them, are going to be in rest areas, but not exclusively. They're going to be in other, parts of different places you pull off, like service stations and that kind of stuff. So that's just one example, but there's also a lot of money for highways, bridges, public transportation, that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of money coming down. And I think we all have to be vigilant here too, like not just about the money, but what that money is going to do. So that money is going to build a lot of stuff. It's going to build roads. It's going to build rebuild bridges. It's going to build a bunch of infrastructure that has to do with transportation, like railway stations, bus stops, sidewalks, all kinds of things that money is going to pay for. And I think what we have to do as disability advocates is make sure that when it's done accessible. So what we don't want to do is end up having billions and billions of dollars spent to build sidewalks and bridges and fueling stations that we can't use, right? So we need to make sure that those things are built accessible. I'm going to be doing a lot of monitoring on the federal level to try to make sure that happens, but really where the best opportunity to make that happen is at the grassroots level in your own cities and in your state. So you should really be watching and monitoring and making sure that these things are done correctly and accessible. So we don't have to use our advocacy resources to go back and try to retrofit a bunch of stuff that was built wrong in the first place. So we already have to do too much of that anyway. So this all kind of led to the disability portfolio that I'm putting together. There are basically 4 pillars to the portfolio I'm putting together. So the first one is safe and accessible air travel. That relates back to what I was telling you, why I had to drive across the country and back. So you may know that the Access Board, along with the TRB, which is the Transportation Research Board, did a study last year to determine whether or not flying in your own wheelchair was feasible. So they determined it was feasible, and of course it was. I mean, it's been feasible for a very long time. There just hasn't been the will to make it happen. So that report saying that it's feasible at this point was really an important landmark, though. I mean, to say that it is in fact feasible to do that. So their recommendation was that the Department of Transportation take on mapping out a roadmap by where people actually get to fly in their own wheelchairs. So the roadmap would include some research like on tie-down devices, on crash worthiness of wheelchairs, that kind of stuff. How we can do seating that may be more like bus seating, where a row of seats folds up, or something where they don't have to actually lose seats on the plane. They just have to make a place where they can fold it up like a bus or something. So that would, in fact, save a lot of lives from people who, like Gracia Figueroa, who died recently. That would save people's lives that way. It would also, in my opinion, just save, pretty sure Luann and several of you have gone through this, but whenever I get on an airplane, I end up getting injured. It's just not severe, but I end up getting injured. I have to heal up after every single flight that I take. And as old as I'm getting, that's harder and harder to heal up. My body just doesn't heal like it used to. So it's also going to save a lot of injuries, death and injuries. So that's where my efforts are going to be focused, is getting that roadmap together to get people to be able to fly in their own wheelchairs on airplanes. Now, if we can just get a roadmap of how to get there, it'll be a huge accomplishment, in my opinion. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to start focusing on reinvigorating the enforcement of the Air Carrier Access Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So all of these wheelchairs that they're damaging per day, like it's an average of around 26 to 28 wheelchairs daily that airlines are damaging or destroying. So we're going to figure out how there's some loopholes in the rules. I can tell it to you, but it wouldn't make much sense. But so what we're going to do is go through the rules and plug those holes as well, so that DOT can start fining people or fining airlines for those the damages that they're causing to people's wheelchairs, because there needs to be some sort of punishment for that. DOT has said they're waiting for what do they call it, like practice. I can't remember the other term, but pattern of practice. So that means multiples, right? So if you're having thousands of wheelchairs damaged or destroyed every year, to me, that's a pattern of practice. So they should just find them anyway. But anyway, we have to get to that. So really, we want to change the rules so that the Department of Transportation can really start enforcing and reinvigorating enforcement of the Air Carrier Access Act and the ADA. Now, the ADA, as you know, only applies to the airport part, but that's part of the bad experience that we all go through too, is the airport. So we're also going to be reinvigorating the enforcement of the ADA within the airports as well. And there's a bunch of infrastructure money that's also going into airports. So we need to be vigilant with that as well. So the second pillar to the disability portfolio I'm advocating for is public rights of way. So highways, sidewalks, bus stops, all that kind of stuff are considered public rights of way. So there are rules around accessibility that, I should say draft rules. So if you can believe it or not, there are no current national rules for public rights of way in regards to access. 30 years after the ADA is passed, we don't have accessibility rules around public rights of way. There's obviously a lot of that has been built according to the ADA, but we don't have those rules in place. So that is something that the Access Board and the Department of Transportation is working on together. So that's the second pillar of the stuff I'm going to be working on, making sure that the other forms of transportation, like sidewalks and roads and bridges and those public rights of way, are accessible too. So air travel, public rights of way, and then the third one is electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Wanted to make sure that when we get electrified vehicles and we get autonomous vehicles, that they're accessible to people with disabilities so we can use them. What I'm really fearful of, and I think a lot of other people are fearful of, is that we're going to get electric cars and you will not be able to retrofit them because the batteries are in the floor, which is where your ramp goes. So, and the tie downs have to be installed on the floor. So there's all these reasons that they're going to put the batteries in the floor, but those batteries being in the floor are going to make them inaccessible to people with disabilities. Also very worried about interface kinds of stuff for people with sensory and cognitive disabilities, like especially around electrified vehicles. So these electric fueling stations that are going in all over the country, I have seen really bad examples and I've seen really good examples. Like I've seen where the electronic fueling station is up on a big mound of dirt, like in a shopping center, and you park next to it, to walk up on the mound of dirt to get the cord to plug it in, which obviously isn't going to work for us. There's no accessible parking, so you can't park a van there. So, and then yesterday on my way home here, stayed at a hotel and they had an electronic fueling station. It's like in the parking lot. And there's a regular parking space right next to it. And there's a accessible parking space on the other side. So that electronic fueling station could be used by either a regular person fueling their electric car or a person with disability fueling their car. So it's, that's the best example. There's a clear path of travel, but the thing I wasn't able to really look at was the interface. But the Department of Transportation is required to issue rules, well, actually guidance, 90 days after the passage of the bill. So on electronic fueling stations. And so those rules, that guidance is coming out right now, and it will have guidance in there telling people that they do have to make them accessible when they install them. And then the other part, after 180 days, they have to issue the rules. And so those will be coming out too. So, and that will have access required in that as well. So the fourth and final pillar is employment of people with disabilities. This infrastructure is money is gonna create tons of jobs, and there's going to be a lot of work out there that's available. And we need to make sure that both within the Department of Transportation and on the state and local level, that there are jobs that are created. When those jobs are created, people with disabilities also have access to getting those jobs. So that's the 4 pillars around transportation. There are some other things that, you know, we're looking at as well, but those are the kind of the 4 that I'm kind of pushing. So with that, I'll throw it back to you guys for any questions or thoughts you might have.
Anybody have any thoughts or questions for Kelly?
Hi, Kelly. This is Kendra Burgess from The Whole Person. Good morning.
Hi, Kendra.
I found everything that you shared very interesting, so thank you for the information. What is the best way to kind of keep tabs on, you know, when these rules come out? Is there a particular DOT website that, you know, you'll be updating for us, or like what's the best way to just kind of keep tabs on things as they progress?
That's a good question. Thank you, Kendra. Like DOT does have a website, and there's as you all know, there's this executive order by the president requiring equity and inclusion. So that EO has really created like a focus on equity and inclusion at the department and every other agency as far as that goes. So there will be a section on the website around equity, and I think that's probably your best place to look. But also look, there's also going to be a whole section on, if there isn't already, to be honest with you, I haven't gone to DOT's website. Recently, I did it when I first started work there, but I haven't done it since. But there will probably be a section around the bipartisan infrastructure law too, that will outline a lot of this stuff. So I look at both of those places, but also go to your local DOT and ask them what their plans are. What are they going to do with this money when it gets to them? Because most of this is frankly going to be flow through money that goes from DOT federal to the DOTs on the state level. And then they're going to be doing a lot of the determinations about where that money goes. So you have an opportunity now to affect where that money goes in Kansas through your local DOT.
That, Kelly, going to be one-time money or ongoing? Or I'm just thinking about, you know, some of our rural communities, which I think is probably one of the areas that these guys are working on the most, is yeah, there's some areas that have some local paratransit, that kind of thing. But there's also areas that have nothing. So I'm just wondering if that funding would be able to use to increase services that are available and start services that in areas that it isn't available at all. But the problem is, you know, once you get it started, is there going to be ongoing funding to keep it going too?
So the bill is a 10-year bill.
Okay.
And which is why it was scored at over $1 trillion. This is over 10 years. So, but most of that is going to be in the first 5. So most of the building and the infrastructure stuff is going to be over the first 5 years. The second 5 years is going to be more money to maintain it once it's in place. So that's my understanding anyway.
This is Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Just wanted to make a comment regarding autonomous vehicles and vehicles that people with disabilities can hopefully, go to a showroom and like everybody else does and pick out a car and drive away. I am part of a group called We Will Ride, which is part of APD. But there are some. I'm hopeful. I'll be cautiously hopeful. There are some small startup companies that are doing some work around, from the ground up, working on making some of these vehicles accessible. And one that we looked at was a company called Cruise, and I'm going to reach out to Tony Lee to ask him about the question about the batteries, because that's a great question about where they are. But because they were actually exploring about in this vehicle getting pros and cons about whether to put the ramp, in the floor slide out, or whether to have it a fold up. There were two different options they were looking at, and I don't think they've landed on which one they would choose. But so there is some good work being done on there, or it's just not enough of it. So I just wanted to let people know.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. The woman who's at Cruise, I actually worked with her a lot when she was with Google. I tried to get her to bring an autonomous vehicle to the NICO conference for years. I was really twisting her arm to get, but I never was able to quite get it there. But she's really good. I can't think of her name right now, but and then Volkswagen Porsche has been doing some really good work around the accessibility of autonomous vehicles too, and planning around floor ramps and the tie down stuff, so that they can create both an electronic and or electric and both autonomous vehicle that would be accessible to people, including the interface for deaf or blind folks as well. So there's because if you have an autonomous vehicle, then it's accessible to everybody. So anyway, they've been doing some good work too. So there is hope out there for sure. I think there's still the fear exists, but there's definitely some companies who are trying. But it would be really cool if we could just go to a showroom and pick up the car we want and drive away. That would be a huge difference. I don't know. And I did a Facebook post real quick, but the minivan I bought almost 10 years ago now, it's the underneath of it's rusted so bad that I basically have to get rid of it because of the rust. Who's experienced that in any other car? I've got a 1971 Oldsmobile that has no rust. It's 50 years old and it's not rusted out. It's the materials I think they used to do this. But anyway, there is some good work going on, and I'm familiar with We Will Ride. I was part of that too. Glad you're on it.
Do you have any other questions or comments for Kelly?
This is Mignon in Dodge City. And I have, about 3 years ago, I flew through an airport trying to make connections. And that particular airport used to have a courtesy room or a courtesy area where people with disabilities could wait for their flight and get to the right gate to fly wherever they're going. The last time I was there, there were no courtesy people. I barely made it to the gate, and that was because I had to ask a lot of questions and ask a lot of people at different gates to get to the correct gate I was needing to get to in order to make my connection with the flight. Is there going to be in this infrastructure money, some monies to help these airports set up some type of courtesy spaces or something to help, like, because I am legally blind, so I can't read the gate signs. So, and so that was one of the problems I had, was I could not read the gate sign and I couldn't read what time the plane was departing. So that is my question to, and my concern is to help those with disabilities that may not be able to read gate signs or understand gate signs or the arrival and departure lists.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So another good question. So what I would tell you is, like, those courtesy rooms were, I think they were eliminated, or a lot of them were, for a couple reasons. One was it's sort of discriminatory, and they take people with disabilities to a different place, a different room, segregated areas, so that you don't get in everybody's way. The other thing was, what happened a lot was people got taken to those rooms and then just left there. So people were missing their flights and missing all kinds of stuff because people would put them there and then forget about them. And they never did make their connections. So those had numerous problems. So I think where the focus at this point is on stuff around wayfinding. And there is going to be a lot of effort on putting that kind of money into wayfinding efforts at airports. That's part of that ADA stuff that I talked about around airports, is actually helping people get from, well, not only from, but in the parking space to the airport. There's a whole process that people have to go through from there. So you have to be able, like the kiosk, the ticketing kiosks need to be accessible. There should be wayfinding available. There should be service animal relief place. I mean, there's a whole series of stuff, including wayfinding, so that people can, and we're also there's going to be a focus on making sure that the communications in airports are accessible to both blind and deaf folks. So an example of that is, you could easily just create an app that people could use once they get to the airport to find their way and know when their flight is and what gate it's at and all that stuff. So anyway.
Kelly, don't you think, oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, so I think that's where the focus is going to be, is like making that whole experience more accessible, including some assistance with getting your luggage in and out of the airport. So.
Yeah, and I think part of it, this is Luann, I think part of it too is the crappy job that airports and airlines do with their employees. I mean, why don't they, when they have someone with an obvious disability, checking in, why wouldn't they ask them if they want assistance to their gate? I mean, there are some airports that do that, or airlines, but obviously there's always a lot of failure in their communication, that's for sure.
So, and TSA has, I don't know if you guys have used this, but TSA actually does have a program where they will help you go through the whole airport thing, and especially the TSA part. So they will meet and greet you and then help you get to your flight. So you also may want to think about that. Even as much as I dislike TSA, I will give them that program.
Yeah, last time I flew, they tried to get me to get out of my chair and give them the cushion to run through the X-ray, and I pretty much told her where to go and that I needed to speak to her supervisor. Then I told him where to go if he thought I was going to get out of my chair for him, because I'd never done that. I mean,
I had that same experience, and the supervisor sided with the other guy
Yeah.
and said, well, you know, you don't have to fly. We can make it so you don't fly. And I said, okay,
Yeah.
we'll see where this goes with headquarters in DC. So
Yeah.
they ended up having me just lean over.
Yeah. And that's what I told him. I said, I've been vying for years. And I said, all you do is you lean, and you know, it's like, it's not that difficult, but this woman was a real,
Well, anyway, TSA does have that service. So when you next trip you take, if you take one on an airplane, check out the TSA website and look for that. I can't remember what the name of it is. I think it's something like CARES, but anyway.
yeah, I think that sounds right.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments for Kelly?
Christina, what are some of the, I think it would be interesting for Kelly to hear too, maybe like what some of the goals of this work group for the SPIL. I mean, I know in the SPIL, we have the 4 different work groups, the one focused on transportation, which is focused on promoting accessible transportation in Kansas. But do you guys have goals underneath that you're working towards?
Yeah, that was going to be my next go-to, Lynn. So thank you.
See, I knew that. I got you right in there.
Yeah. No, some of the things that our group is focusing on is extending public transportation into the evening and weekend hours. That's a big issue for those areas that do have public transportation. Is that and then the hours that they are available, there's not enough transportation to actually meet the needs of those areas. And then we're also trying to find ways into starting up or expanding transportation into rural areas, because there's quite a bit, I know, out in Western Kansas where public transportation is either non-existent or they've got to wait, you know, so many hours for somebody to come actually pick them up. And then another thing we're also working on is like transportation for across state lines. I know a lot of us work along the like Kansas-Missouri border or the Kansas-Nebraska border. And so sometimes trying to get to doctors that are, or to the hospital, or, you know, different places that are just over the state, you know, that Medicaid pays for, so to speak. Because it goes across state lines, you've got to go through all the red tape and all that to make that happen. So I wanted to get your thoughts. You know, is there anything you've come across over the years, or do you have any advice as to the best way to go about communicating and getting some of this stuff put in place?
Well, those are operating costs, the stuff to go out to expand where it goes, and lengthening service hours or expanding the service hours. Those are operating costs. So the infrastructure bill isn't going to cover operating. It's covering infrastructure. So it's building stuff. So, I mean, there's maintenance money in there for it afterward, but it's not operating. So probably the best work, one of the areas to help work on that is through advocacy on a federal level for appropriations for public transportation, to do that, and on a state level too. That's the only place I could direct you.
Yeah, and those have been long-standing issues within our state, and I'm sure other states also.
Yeah, it's the same way in Boise.
Yeah.
The buses ran from like 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. If you wanted to ride on the weekends or in the evening, you were out of luck.
Yeah.
So, in regards to, I know like communicating a lot on the local and state as well as federal levels, but is there any approaches or any ways of communicating with them that's been, you found has worked better over the years versus others?
You guys are the best voices on that. I mean, you know what to do. Kansas is probably one of the better states on advocacy stuff, so you guys set the bar on it. The only thing I would say is I've recently seen it linked to employment, like because people were waiting for the access for hours every day. I mean, your employer doesn't just let you come in 3 hours late, right? So people lose their jobs because of that. And a lot of people aren't able to get jobs because they don't have transportation. So I think if you could, the more you could link it to employment, that might be a good strategy.
Well, and I think too, Christina, I don't know if you guys have been following, you know, at the state level, the committees on transportation, that kind of thing. You know, and they're saying this year is actually going to be a really robust year for the state to have money. That's what I'm hearing. That's why.
Oh yeah, you may want to look into the CARES money I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
because that's specifically meant to like help
Yeah.
alleviate some of the problems brought about by COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
think
know
there's
that-
I think there's different avenues at the state level too that could be accessed.
Well, that's what I mean. Like the CARES money
Mm-hmm.
from the feds was sent to Kansas DOT.
Yeah, and that would
And
be
this-
under it's under the Spark Committee here in Kansas.
The state hasn't. There's a bunch of states haven't spent much of that CARES money at all. It's just sitting there. So that's definitely an avenue, Luann. I'd go there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, we've definitely made some inquiries into different things like that on the state level. And I know as far as the conversation starter, Greg posted kind of a letter onto our SPIL Trans website. So if anybody wants to go take a look at that and use that as kind of a jumping off point when you're reaching out to, you know, the state and legislatures and different organizations and things like that. That was something that I know he had been working on. And all of your insight, Kelly, has been, and Luann has been very helpful. We greatly appreciate that.
Christina, I might also add, I know you have a couple of people, because I was looking at who the emails went to, but you have a couple of people on here that are tied to transportation providers.
Yes.
Right. And I
Yes.
think that's a key too, is the more you can partner and work with the local providers in your area and work together to advocate for that funding. You know, power in numbers. So
Definitely. Okay, does anybody have any other questions, insights, thoughts? Is there any issues in your area that you want to, you know, share with the group and see if we might be able to brainstorm with you on some ideas?
So can I ask you all just one real quick question, and then I'm going to go. The 4 pillars that I outlined, does that make sense to you guys? Is that where you think the advocacy at DOT should be directed? Or is there something we're missing?
well, I mean, I really think, I really think one of the keys is obviously funding, but as you said, that's more appropriations than what you're looking at. I, for one, love the fact that the air travel is number one on your list, as you and I have shared many horror stories of flying. So I don't know about other people. Kendra.
This is Kendra. I echo that as well, Luann. I'm so glad that air travel is being, a focal point in your plan. Over the last probably few months, I've been talking a lot with my coworkers here at the Whole Person, as we're having a new airport built here in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And so we've even consulted, on the airport project. So, they're doing a lot of things to make the airport itself more accessible. But, if the airplane is still inaccessible, then that still creates a lot of barriers. And I too have heard horror stories. So I hadn't heard that, individuals, have even risked death or died from their airplane experience. So I think that's something that, I'd be happy to echo as a reason for change as well, to really help push whatever initiatives you guys have on that. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I can tell you, of course, Laura knows. Laura's still on. Brian Atwell, some of you knew Brian, longtime director at Link here in Hayes. And he actually got a wound on his rear because when they were transferring him, they scraped something. I don't know if it was, I think it was over the armrest, because this was years ago, didn't have a folding armrest. And he fought that for years. It was terrible.
I've had that same thing happen where they scraped me, get me over the armrest. And then there was a guy, the chair of the board for PVA, Paralyzed Veterans of America. They were transferring, he's a quad, they were transferring him and dropped him in the jetway.
And I've been dropped.
Broke his tailbone. He didn't realize it until he got, it was when he got home, he felt his cushion was wet. It was blood. That's why his cushion was wet. So that got infected and turned into decubitus, and he spent I think 3 or 4 months in the hospital and damn near died from the infection. So
yeah,
he basically says he's lucky to be alive because the infections that he got were so significant that it's a wonder he didn't die. So it was,
Brian was at that point too. Yeah, it was bad.
So it's and that was recent. So there's death and dying that goes on. We just don't know about it, right? Because the one with Gracia Figueroa was made the news and stuff. So there's a lot of that that's happened. We don't hear about it because it doesn't make the news.
Well, I know they injured my shoulder the last time I flew, and I'm still fighting it 2.5 years later. I've had physical therapy for 1.5 years now. It's ridiculous.
It is not a safe experience. It's not. It's anyway.
And
well, good. I'm
related to that. I just forgive my ignorance. I'm just curious. So in that case, would it be up to the person flying to file their own individual lawsuit against the airline, or are there protections in place when harm is done?
No, there isn't. That's part of the problem. You can't file suit. Well, you can under other statutes, but you can't file a suit under the Air Carrier Access Act because there's no private right of action included, which is one of the things that we've been advocating for over the past few years, is to include a private right of action in the Air Carrier Access Act. If that was in there, we would have more teeth, and we'd be able to sue, and the airlines would feel the pain, because it's only money that makes them feel any pain. So that would be the biggest change that could occur. You can file a lawsuit under the wrongful death, and stuff, but it gets more difficult to prove the airline specifically is responsible for your death, because you have all this chain of events, right? Like the infection, and then the care of the infection, and all that kind of stuff that they can, and the airlines do, blame the victim a lot. So yeah, there's little protection. The only thing that the Air Carrier Access Act provides is that you can file a complaint with DOT. And frankly, most of the people with disabilities that have stopped filing complaints with DOT because nothing never goes anywhere. So just go into this file folder somewhere in the cabinet in DOT. And so, yeah, there's like not much protection. So but I think there's under some of the rules, if we plug some of the holes I talked about around the beginning of this, there could be more enforcement. So we're hoping that maybe that can help as well. So just damaging the airline or the airplane or the wheelchairs, I'm sorry. If we can start finding them for that, and then they are required to provide safe, I think it's and where there is safe flying experience for everybody, right? So that would include people with disabilities. So there's also some thinking around using that section of the rules to apply to some of the transfer stuff they do. So if they're required to give everybody a safe experience and a safe flight, it should also apply to this. It's not specific around people with disabilities, but it should also apply. So anyway, that's another avenue we're looking at. But the private right of action is really and being able to fly in your own wheelchair. Those are the two fixes to this. I think the whole problem. If those two things were happening, it would be a whole different flight experience. I mean, if they don't have to transfer you, then they can't drop you or harm you or whatever. So.
Well, and part of my thing is too, Kelly, is not only are they not injuring us, they're saving their employees from work comp issues.
Yep.
I mean, I'm 6 feet tall and I'm certainly not light. So they need to have some muscle. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the people they've sent to transfer me,
Yes, I would.
I mean, when I'm on a plane and this, and I just turned 62, so nothing against older people, but when they send a 65-year-old lady that weighs 100 pounds into all by herself to get me in the aisle chair, ain't happening. Go get some help, man. But I also did want to say, Kendra, I am crossing my fingers that you guys are going to really make sure that the new airport in Kansas City is going to be accessible, since you guys are the ones right there in Kansas City. I mean, we could really make it state of the art,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Kelly said, from the time you get there to somebody carrying your luggage, and I mean, that would be huge.
Oh yeah, we've been really engaged with that process with the city and the airport. So we're hoping that it translates in the final product as well. And Kelly, I have one other question for you. I'm so sorry, I'm full of questions today. But would it be possible to maybe give some sort of accessibility for people with disabilities rating for certain airlines. I don't know if that, like, if they were to get assessed by DOT somehow, and then that could be public record, do you think that that would create some greater accountability?
Oh, that's a cool thought. I haven't ever thought of that. I'll pursue it. I'm not sure that DOT can do something like that because they're a government entity, but
Although some of us don't agree on the ratings of airlines. Kelly's favorite airline's always been United, probably because they've actually replaced wheelchairs that they destroyed.
yeah, I think it was because of the employees that I knew. That to me,
I
that's
like
like
Southwest.
yeah, that's a key to being able to be safe, is like developing these relationships with your local airline reps, right? But anyway, that's something I'm going to pursue, that because the Consumer Protection Division at FAA are the ones who are responsible for enforcement of the ACAA, the Air Carrier Access Act, and I'm gonna pursue that. There's also a guy who is on the AAPD board, or used to be on the AAPD board, and he used to work for American Airlines, and so, and he wants to talk to me too, because he's kind of horrified about how bad things have gotten. So anyway, he's another person I'll pursue that with, because he may have some thoughts exactly about how to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, we have reviews for everything these days, in the consumer industry, and why not?
Yeah, the first thing I look at when I Google a hotel or anything is the stars. I mean, it got 3 out of 5 stars. I'm not staying there, man. It's got.
Well, I've always heard that Southwest Airline was promoted by many as the best for people with disabilities, but I don't think it was ever anything really formal.
There was a survey done actually by, I don't remember who did it, but I think it was the Consumer Protection Division at FAA, and they did find that. They found that Southwest was the preferred airline amongst people with disabilities. But
yeah, why not formalize that process into some sort of like annual review that is required and then can be shared with the public?
Yeah, I'm going to pursue it. I think that's
It might give them more incentive.
Yeah.
Is it because those ratings, like at hotels and restaurants and stuff, that they look at that. I mean, that's definitely something they daily think about, was their ratings. So, yep.
And that'll hit their bottom line if they're not performing. So anyway, thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
No, that's a great idea. Thank you.
That is a great idea, Kendra. I'm glad you brought that up, and thank you for your questions. I was going to say, I think, unless anybody has any other questions or thoughts or anything for Kelly or even Luann, I think that pretty much just covers our agenda for today. We really greatly appreciate you, Kelly, for taking time out, and you, Luann, for joining us today and answering our questions and kind of giving us an idea of what's going on as far as national transportation, and your insights into what we can do as far as state and local. Our next meeting is set up for 10 a.m. on April 12th. And I believe Mr. Peter, and I apologize if I butcher your last name, it's Jonky, is going to be speaking with us on that meeting. So if nobody else has any other questions or thoughts, comments, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up today's meeting.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Christina, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.